Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ambassador, thank you for being here today, for testifying. Since you were appointed as Special Representative for Afghan Reconciliation, I've repeatedly raised concerns about the inclusion of women in the Afghan peace process and, of course, about the preservation of women's rights in Afghanistan. I appreciated your acknowledging that in your comments today. Under the previous administration, these concerns really seemed to fall on deaf ears. I'm disappointed to say that my concerns still have not been sufficiently addressed. I did appreciate your referring to the rights of women and your commitment to that in your opening statement. And I also very much appreciate the fact that the chair and ranking member and my colleagues on this committee, both Republican and Democrat, have almost all raised concerns about what's going to happen. But what I really want to do is put a face on what we're talking about in Afghanistan. When you say the level of violence is too high, I want to put a face on that. When you say what Taliban values look like, I want to put a face on that too. Last month, the State Department posthumously honored 7 women who were killed in 2020. These women were given the Department of State's International Women of Courage Award. They are pictured here. They were murdered for choosing to live their lives outside of the narrow confines of what the Taliban and other extremist groups deem acceptable for women. And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter for the record the State Department's statement on these women and what they devoted their lives to.
Without objection, they shall be included.
Thank you. I also want to highlight them, and they reflect, I think, thousands of other women in Afghanistan who have been the targets of violence. We can call them courageous, and certainly we do, but they shouldn't have to be courageous to do what they tried to do. It should not require courage to be a journalist like Malayla Maiwand, who is right here. It should not require courage to stand up for basic human rights like Fatima Khalil or Freshta Kuistani both did. 2 of them are at the top there. All those women were killed by the Taliban. And unfortunately, that's exactly what's required of women in Afghanistan today. And I worry that this reality is only going to escalate after our departure. So I hope everyone who is watching this hearing today will remember these women, remember these 7 women and the women like them. Remember the girls in Afghanistan, the girls who should have the opportunity to grow up in a world with the freedoms that their mothers fought to secure. They are watching, and we should be watching. And I just want to also acknowledge the other 4 women who are pictured here. In the middle is Fatima Rajabi. She was a 23-year-old prison guard who was on her way home on a civilian bus, stopped by the Taliban. She was kidnapped, tortured, murdered, and 2 weeks later, her body was sent to her family. At the bottom is Freshta. She was a 35-year-old prison guard who was killed on her way to a taxi to get to work, again, by gunmen. In the bottom is General Sharmila Frog. General Frog was the head of the gender unit in the National Directorate of Security and one of the longest-serving female NDS officers in Afghanistan. She was assassinated in an IED explosion targeting her vehicle in Kabul. And finally, for me, the most horrific of all of these barbarous acts is Maryam Nourzad in the corner. Miriam was a midwife. She was killed when the hospital in Kabul, where she was helping a woman trying to deliver a baby, was attacked by 3 Taliban gunmen. They not only killed her when she refused to leave the woman who was delivering her baby, they killed the woman and they killed the baby. These are the Taliban who we are being asked to join at the negotiating table to support. I will not support any efforts that will allow them to continue to commit these horrific acts without any accountability for their behavior. What we do over the next 4 months is going to impact the lives of women for generations to come. And I believe we have to do everything in our power to support the women of Afghanistan. We have worked for 2 decades alongside our allies to advance the rights of not just women and girls, but other ethnic minorities in Afghanistan. And we can't let those 2 decades of hard work be ignored in peace talks. We owe it to the women and girls to ensure that their hard-fought rights are preserved. Sadly, I believe an arbitrary deadline for withdrawal forces in Afghanistan risks those efforts. These 7 women didn't deserve to die, and we owe it to them and to the generations that will come after them to do everything to prevent any more Afghan women from the same fate. And as we've heard, this is not a partisan issue. It is not a women's issue. It is a human rights issue, and it is a security issue for the future of Afghanistan. I want to point, Mr. Chairman, and ask that this also be introduced for the record. This is a newly declassified National Intelligence Council report on the fate of women in Afghanistan after we withdraw.
Without objection, it shall be included.
A few things in this report stood out for me.
I would just say the senators
My time is over.
present, yes, but it's very compelling, so I want to give her extra time, but I do want to recognize that there are some other members.
Thank you. I'm almost finished, Mr. Chairman. I think what stood out in this report is that when the international community pushes for women's rights and pushed for women's rights in Afghanistan, we saw that that made a difference. I believe we've got to keep up this effort after the United States withdraws. And Ambassador, I would urge you to do everything in your power to ensure that women are represented at the table and their rights are preserved in any future Afghanistan. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.